Thank you, Chair. 2 years ago, President Biden issued a red line to the PRC not to provide material support for Russia's war in Ukraine or face consequences. And as I mentioned, while we don't see any lethal aid yet, certainly China is keeping the Russian economy afloat with energy purchases and providing a number of dual-use materials and so forth to Russia to be able to continue this war. At the NATO summit, the alliance made a clear rebuke of Beijing for underwriting Putin's war in Ukraine. In the Washington Declaration, allies threatened that, quote, PRC cannot enable the largest war in Europe in recent history without this negatively impacting its interests and reputation, end quote. And this level of clarity is encouraging. However, without subsequent actions to ensure further PRC support, these words are likely to achieve little. Since the start of the war, the U.S. and the EU have sanctioned numerous Chinese companies and individuals to stem the flow of PRC dual-use goods. While this has led to a recent decline, it still is estimated that hundreds of millions of dollars in dual-use goods continue to flow from the PRC to Russia. Secretary O'Brien, NSA Sullivan recently said that the administration is prepared to tighten the screws on the PRC support for Russia, including potential sanctions against PRC banks. Given that the time is of the essence, when can we expect a decision to move forward on this? Will Chinese banks be sanctioned?
Thank you, Senator. So 2 years ago, we talked to the Chinese not about just material assistance, but specifically focused on lethal assistance, and that line's held. Now we are talking to them about the material amounts of dual-use goods that they are providing, and it is disturbing and wrong. They are providing 90% of the electronics that Russia depends on, 70% of the machine tools. This has had an effect of our European partners now recognizing that China is stoking the war machine that threatens Europe. And that's forcing China now to recalibrate some of its basic policies. How long it takes them to do that, that is something we will work to hasten, but that's a real exercise in daily diplomacy. On sanctions, as you said, we've sanctioned, I don't know the specific number. The Europeans earlier this summer began sanctioning a few Chinese entities as well. That was a significant step for them to take. We will continue to work on this. We don't preview exactly when we roll things out, but I assure you this is an area of real focus. And any information you've got, please provide to us, but it is something we'll keep working on.
All right, so but you can't give me a timeline for when there may be sanctions on Chinese banks that are facilitating these transactions?
I'm not going to promise a date, but I will tell you we work on this every day.
Well, also complicating this is the fact that Chinese banks are like half the Chinese transactions with these Chinese companies that Russia's doing are made through intermediaries in the UAE, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, other countries. What are you doing to address that aspect of it? Is this also part of what you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, and someone from Treasury can walk through some of the difficulties, but there's been a real effort to reach out, particularly, say, in the Emirates, which has a deep banking sector. One of the challenges is that a lot of this trade is kind of closer to cash and carry. It's not like an infrastructure project where there's lots of documentation and research. It's just, people kind of Venmoing each other money. So we have to make clear to banks that they have a higher duty of care to know their customers. And there's been a real effort in this. It began when I was in my previous role. And we're seeing some progress on this in some of these third country banks, particularly Turkey and the Emirates.
And you also mentioned about, for example, I think you said 70% of the machine tools imported to Russia are coming from the PRC. Where are the other 30% coming from?
Probably the U.S. and Europe. I don't have the exact breakdown. The difficulty with many of the products we're discussing, whether it's electronics or machine tools, is that they're sold on to brokers and then they're sold on in commerce. So knowing the end user is difficult for the companies. We have been speaking with American companies and our European colleagues have been speaking with their companies about understanding who they're really selling to so that nothing new moves. And there are some new restrictions, and we'll take more steps to get at these shadow brokers.
Can you give me an example of just what some of the new concrete steps we can take to cut off the supply of this other 30%?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing is getting on, having our companies understand that when they're getting new customers, those may well just be proxies for an old customer who's now illegal. So working our way through that's important. The second is identifying some of the key brokers. This is maybe more an issue for the electronics, but often the sales are just made to a giant wholesaler who then holds the goods and then sells them on. And so having those held to a higher standard is important. A third is in Europe particularly to deal with land crossings. So the EU what happens is somebody in a Western European country makes a sale, their national authority will check it, but often not be fully aware of the situation, at the end point. And then the goods will be routed through Belarus or Russia by land, and they fall off the back of a truck. So we need those border crossings to be toughened. The EU just gave those countries the authority to stop suspicious trucks, and now it's an exercise of putting in the enforcement muscle to make sure they can carry that out.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you,